Oh, hi. There you go. Recording in progress. So, lovely to know that you're all interested to know a little bit more about sociocracy. When we first started discussing, particularly the generative citizen community, we had some questions about how do we want to organize. And what was very clear in everybody's heads is that we didn't want this to be sort of a top-down, hierarchically driven organization where some people would take all of the decisions and everybody else was a follower. So very quickly, we started discussing sociocracy. I think, Julian, you'd heard about it in some circles. I use it in some corporations where I train. And so we started discussing sociocracy as a possibility for basically structuring, organizing, and steering the community. Now, of course, everything started with Generative Citizen, and I'm not sure, some of you are already very familiar with Generative Citizen, some are not, and are here to find out a bit more. So let me just give you the basic principles. You know, the Generative Citizen community, what is that? It's a group of people, it's a global group of people who really want to be a global community of friends and colleagues who inspire and support one another to build a better world together. Yeah, we basically all came from, let's call it the generative stable. You know, all of it had some background in either generative coaching or Transcamp or 𝘼𝙣𝙣, all of those beautiful principles. And we thought about really what we want to do is we want to bring this to the world. And we want to basically contribute where and when we can to creating a better world out there, which seems to be even more important these days than it already was a couple of years ago. And the way we want to do this is by offering training in the principles of generative citizenship. We want to create peer groups. And we also at the time thought about what are some projects that we could create where some of these principles of generative citizenship are brought to the world so that we could help the world to resolve some problems in a generative fashion. So the vision that we created together, and this was all work that we did at the very start, so Julian was very much involved in that as well. We came up with a vision together, and we basically wanted to create a world where people feel safe, welcome, creative, and where people are looking for new positive solutions that we can generate together and new connections to build a better world together. It's just kind of a pause right there to think about with everything that's happening right now, this seems even more acute than I think when we started. I don't remember, Julian, when did we start this?
It was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think at the moment, we're just doing a portion of it. We're just basically, we're doing events and training. That's really what we're doing at the moment.
Yeah. So Judith Lowe was the person who developed the principles and the practices of generative citizens. So she really did a lot of thinking about when we look at generative coaching, when we look at Transcamp, all of the beautiful work that's being done by Stephen and by Robert, how could we translate that into some practices that would be useful to every single citizen out there, to every single member of the community? What is it that people need to learn? What is it that people need to demonstrate as skills in order to build a better community together? And she came up with these 5 steps, which we call the 5 practices of generative citizen. The first one is we are all familiar with, is coach state or state management. The second step is self-development. So this ambition to constantly be able to look in the mirror and figure out a way to become more regulated, to have more insight into how we function, what triggers us, and how we can regulate that. The third practice is empathy. How can we attune with what other people are feeling and adjust to that? Communication and relationship. How do we build generative relationships with people? And then there was a 5th element, which has to do with evidence-based knowledge of the world, which was to do everybody needs to make an effort, or we want everybody to make an effort to really gather factually based view on issues, right? To not sort of stay stuck in opinions or biased perceptions, to make an effort to gather the facts. Julian, I know you're more into the principles than I am. So anything you'd like to add about any of those?
No, it sounds great what you said.
Cool. Good. All right. We also thought about who do we want to be in terms of values and behaviors. I'll just let you read through that a little bit, but in alignment with the practices, the group came up with a number of values that were then translated into very concrete behaviors. The first one obviously was to make a difference. You know, there's a point, and I think Stephen makes that quite a lot as well. We don't want self-development to sort of be a luxury. we want to make a difference in the world, right? At some point, we need to think about all this work that we're doing on ourselves. How can we bring that out into the world and help the world make a step forward? Because otherwise, we're just taking care of ourselves. And that's, of course, a necessary condition, but we wanted to do something more. So we wanted to bring the 5 practices into the world so that the world would benefit from it. Self-development, we want to be role models when it comes to generative citizenship. And so that means that we have to constantly work on ourselves. Empathy, we want to constantly develop compassion, be empathic towards ourselves and others. Communication basically means we need to be role models when it comes to communication, when it comes to listening, inclusion, honoring positive intention. I love that sentence of using our words to heal and not to hurt, to inspire and to create. So it's quite a high standard that we're keeping ourselves to. And then the sharing knowledge practically within generative citizenship. That means that we are taking initiative to share the knowledge with others, that we are bringing the principles of generative citizenship into the world, into the communities. So I think the people who are very familiar with generative citizenship know this stuff. So I'm not going to focus too much on this because I'm moving on to sociocracy, but just kind of checking any questions on that or anything that needs clarifying. I'm just looking at, maybe I can't see all of you here, but hold on. Gordon, you said that you were interested. Any questions from your side? You're mute. You're on mute, Gordon.
I'm just sorry. I know. I'm just. No, I don't have any specific questions at this stage. I'm just really listening and trying, aiming to understand. And you're doing a great job, Anne-Sophie. Thank you.
All right. Please don't hesitate to interrupt if you have some questions or if you want some further explanation. So this is sort of the base, kind of the identity. Oh, yes, Graciela?
Yes, thank you very much. It's very great hearing about this. I have a request, if it's possible. Could you speak a little slower, please?
Of course, no problem. Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Every time I speed up, just raise your hand again and I'll know I need to slow down. Yeah, is that okay?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for telling me. So this is the identity of the generative citizen community. And then we had to think about how do we organize, how do we steer it? So we basically decided to go for an organization method and a governance method, which is based on sociocracy. And sociocracy is a way of organizing, a way of structuring communities' activities that is based on the notion of linked circles. So basically, and I'll show you in a minute, what does that mean for generative citizen? We have created a certain number of circles that each work on a very specific domain with a very specific aim. And every circle is empowered to make its own decisions. So in sociocracy, the people that do the work are actually empowered to take decisions. Yeah, so that's a basic notion within sociocracy. All the circles work independently. They do their own work. They take their own decisions, but they're still linked together. So there's some mechanism by which we make sure that the circles are aware of what the other circles are doing and that there's some transparency in terms of communication. Is this better, Graciela? You good? Okay, cool.
Thank you, yes.
You're very welcome. So what is typical of these circles? They're empowered for a specific domain, and all the circles work in accordance to a certain set of processes and guidelines. We call these patterns. And I will explain 3 of these patterns to you. These patterns have to do with how do we run meetings, right? How do we take decisions? How do we decide who has what role? You'll remember the confusion of Dermot, who says, I'm not even sure what circle I'm in anymore, but it basically means you've been, elected in some of these positions that you're in. But basically, there's a certain number of patterns, and the circles have that in common. We all use the same way of working, and that's what we call patterns. A very specific patterns, and I'll go a little bit more in detail for that one, is a decision-making process. We tend to work with what we call consent decision-making. And consent decision-making essentially means that proposals will move through almost automatically if there are no reasoned objections. And I'll go into a little bit more detail for that. The basic philosophy behind sociocracy is that we want a participative way of working together, which is egalitarian, where everybody is included and where there's a high degree of shared responsibility and decision-making. It's a method of governing and steering that is very effective in a world that changes all the time, and where you need to be able to make many decisions quickly without spending too much time on building consensus. Yeah, is that clear for everybody? You guys okay so far? Yeah. So on the right, you will see the basics of sociocracy, and I need to figure out a way to get you out of the way because I can't see my own slide anymore. But anyway, on the right of the slide, you can see all of the things that I talked about in a nice little graph. Okay, so I'll just skip that part. So moving on, if we then look at, specifically what does that mean? I mentioned in the word circle. Yeah, so a circle is a self-governing, semi-automatic group of people.
Autonomous.
Semi-autonomous.
Yeah.
What you said. Okay, good. Hold on. I do need to get my slides under control here. Let me just share that 1 minute again. I'll put you guys in a different mode and get.
Yeah, you can change your view.
Yeah, I'll need to change my view. Okay. All right. So it's people that collaborate, and they collaborate to basically reach decisions within a certain domain. Domain essentially means the area for which the circle is empowered. Yeah, I'm not going to read literally off the screen, so don't worry about that. Yeah, so the domain is the area for which a circle is empowered. The aim is then that for which the circle is responsible. Everybody okay so far? Yeah, so responsibility and authority go hand in hand in sociocracy. So basically, as I said before, the people that are doing work are also the people that are taking decisions. Yeah. So when you have a circle, you will still have some roles. What's important is that those roles are elected. So whatever role we have in a circle comes out of a process of election, and even that process is a pattern. So there's a distinct way of electing people. Yeah. We use also within Generative Circle, we use 4 roles. We have the leader, and the leader is not a leader in a traditional sense of he or she makes a decision. The leader is basically there to oversee the work and to make sure that the circle continues working towards the aim. But it is not the person taking decisions or having a higher degree of power. We have a facilitator, that's the person who facilitates the meeting, make sure there's some structure, everybody is being heard. The coordinator is more the person that sets the rhythm. Yeah, the coordinator is the person that sets the meetings, make sure there's an agenda for the meeting. We always take notes during the meeting. There's always some documents that need to be up to date. So that's all the work of the coordinator. And then we also have a delegate. And this is the person who represents the circle's voice in the next higher circle. And I'll explain that in the next slide, because as I said, these circles are linked. They are linked through what we call the general circle. And the general circle is a circle that basically incorporates the leaders and the delegates of the various circles. Yeah. And we use the general circle to make sure that the circles stay aware of what each circle is doing, and that we have a little bit of overview of all the activities that are going on. Yeah, but all of these roles are elected. So I don't know, Dermot, if you still remember which roles you have, but you probably have quite a few. I'll give you an overview in a minute, because that is a little bit what happened at the beginning. We had quite some circles and actually not enough people to go around. So quite a few of us fulfill different roles. Yeah. So if I then go to what does then generative circle look like? This is what you have. So basically generative circles, you see a whole lot of circles here and the generative circle in the middle. So today we have 3 active operational circles. The 3 active operational circles are the training circle, the event circle, and the communication circle. As you can see, each circle has a distinct aim and a distinct domain. The aim of the training circle is to define, implement, and support learning initiatives for generative citizenship and for how we can practice generative citizenship. So basically, they are in the process of defining all kinds of different training initiatives where we can bring generative citizenship to the world. Yeah. A second circle is the event circle. And whereas the training circle works on more consistent training paths, the event circle works on designing, planning, executing kind of one-off events. So I'm assuming, Julian, this one came out of the events circle because it's more like a one-off thing. And it's events that bring the community together and we can learn together. The communication circle is then the circle that takes care of both the internal and the external communication. As Julian said, we're constantly thinking about how we can bring more people to the community and to the circles. We also need to think about how we can bring information about the events and about the trainings out there. And that is essentially the work of the communication circle. So anything to do with websites, anything to do with how we use WhatsApp or any other kind of media to put the information out there would be the responsibility of the communication circle. We then have two circles that are a little bit more in a support area, though important. The OD circle was very active at the beginning because the OD circle essentially came up with the organization structure, the governance process. So everything we are talking about here, how we would be structured and how we would operate together, was basically developed by the OD circle.
For those who are not English speakers, OD stands for Organizational Development.
Thank you, Julian. Yeah, organizational development, right? This circle today is less active because the structure is up and running. The processes are up and running. So that circle is not exactly dormant, but it's not very active. The mission circle is kind of
but for example, we've called on Anne-Sophie from the OD circle to do this little presentation today. So the OD circle, members of it, can support the organization.
Julian was worried that I wouldn't have anything to do and not feel very useful anymore. So he kind of set this up. So there you go. And then we have the mission circle, and the mission circle is kind of the guardian of the identity, the mission of the entire Generative Citizen community and work. So basically the mission circle kind of keeps an eye on whether everything that's being done within these various circles is effectively in line with the generative principles, so that we don't promote training or promote activities which would actually contradict some of our principles, or activities that would be completely out of scope and not even related to generative principles. So those two circles kind of only intervene when necessary. The project circle we created initially because we also wanted to not just bring training, but also support projects in the community. But we kind of found out it was a bit too early, so that project circle has been dormant for now. And then in the middle, you have the general circle. So the general circle is a coordination circle. It's not a decision-making organ. And who sits in the general circle? You will find there the leaders of the active circles and the delegates. So we always make sure there's two representatives of each circle in the general circle. The leader is kind of a little bit of the flow from the top to the circles, and the delegate is there to kind of promote the information coming from the circle. So that way you always have two voices representing the circles. Again, what the general circle does is make sure that the different circles are empowered, that they have what they need to work, that the aim is clear, that the domain is clear, that the structure still holds, and that we always are aware of the decisions that are being taken in the respective circles.
Can I interrupt, Anne-Sophie?
Sure.
One decision we've just made, it's a sort of temporary thing, which is that because there are so few people in the other circles, we've actually said anybody who's a regular attendee at the communication, at any of those circles can come to the general circle meeting.
Oh, okay.
If we get bigger, then we might say, actually, it's getting too big. We'll go back to the formal structure of just having the leader and the delegate.
Sounds great. But yes, how it would work in theory is, in theory, you'd have a broader community with a lot more people, which I think you also have in 𝘼𝙣. For those of you who have a seat in 𝘼𝙣, there you have a broader community and you have a general circle, which is actually composed of the people sitting in the circles. But here, indeed, the community kind of coincides with the general circle. Yeah. In the community, you theoretically would have, to answer your question, Gordon, people ideally who have done level 1 of the Generative Citizen training, because it's a good idea to at least know what are the principles of Generative Citizen, but also anybody who is willing to take an interest and to get involved and to really be engaged with Generative Citizen. You don't actually have to necessarily take the training first. You can kind of come and test it out and then see if this is something that would interest you at a later stage. Yeah, that's still true, right, Julian? You're welcome,
yes.
Everybody at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. Is this clear for everybody? Yeah. You see a theoretical notion under there, a circle. So in case some of these circles would become very big, and some people would want to work on something very specific. You could actually, within a circle, create a subcircle. So within the communication circle, you could create a smaller circle of people that are only working on the website, for example. But currently, we're kind of limited to the circles. Yeah? Everybody okay? You good? So this is what it currently look like. And again, this is what I think we created when we first started this. So some of this needs to be updated, Dermot. So you may not immediately have an answer to your question but at least you'll see your name here and there. And as you can see in the mission circle, the training circle, the OD circle, there's quite a few names circulating in different roles, right? And this has to do with the fact that at the beginning, we just simply didn't have enough people on board to give the role to specific people each time. Yeah. Dermot, did you find yourself? You good? So in case you were wondering, you're still the facilitator, I think, of the communication circle. Yeah. Congratulations. Yeah, you're good? Okay. All right. So what are then these practices? So one of the key patterns that we use in Sociocracy is that we have quite standardized meeting formats. We always have the same structure, and that really helps us because it means that everybody just knows what to expect when they come in. And it's also very easy for people who facilitate the meeting. They don't have to reinvent the wheel each time. So all of our meetings are structured in the same way. We always start, like Julian did just before, with a bit of well, we didn't do the coach, but at least there's going to be somewhere some check-in there. Usually we start with some admin stuff, right? We'll check in who's here, who's not here, how long are we going to be together? You know, Julian introduced the notion of the Zoom can only start at, you know, the exact hour. There's going to be some admin to kick off the meeting. And as soon as everybody's landing a bit, we'll have some kind of a meditation or some kind of grounding practice to bring everybody into a coach state. And when we've done that, we do a quick check-in, a personal sharing of how people are. The person doing the facilitation can basically play with this. Yes, Graciela, am I going too fast again?
And a little bit, but I have another question here.
Go for it.
I was wondering if some people, because this is being recorded, maybe some people who are not familiar with the coach word meaning, also in other languages, and perhaps it's important to describe it. It's just a question. And
no problem. I know there's many experts here. So Daniel,
yes.
Daniel, would you like to describe coach state? Let's make this interactive. Are you still here, Daniel? I hope he's not driving.
Yes.
Yes,
Now I'm at home. I was driving, and so it's why I switched off my camera. So could you reframe your request,
Sure.
lady?
Well, if I'm the expert on sociocracy, then you're the expert on coach states. I was just wondering, Graciela asked, since this is recorded, not everybody might be familiar with the term coach state. And I was wondering if we could use your expertise to summarize what the acronym coach state stands for.
Okay, so thank you for your question. So coach state is an acronym the C for being centered and how you bring your attention to what's going on in yourself. The O for being open what is around you, paying attention at the same time as you are centered. The A for awareness. I'm aware that I'm currently talking to you, and I was aware that Anne-Sophie asked me a question, and I had to reframe it quickly in my mind to be very specific. COAH for being hospitable, hospitality. Otherwise, I'm able to welcome what's going on. There is no judgment, it's good or it's bad. So I'm just aware that, okay, everything is welcome. The COAH, and the last C for
Make the somatic
connected. I'm connected to all multiple dimensions. I'm connected to my community, to my family, to the universe, to the mountain, to the river. So this is okay. It was
Thank
not
you.
it was not planned, and Sophie.
Sorry, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brilliant job, and it proves you were in a coach state for responding. So
Yes, I had to.
centered, open, aware, connected, and just hospitably holding, yeah, without judgment. Is that good, Graciela? You happy with that? Cool. Thank you very much for playing, Nanya. Always appreciate.
Thank you. Thank you.
So then we have, as soon as everybody's centered, open, aware and alert, connected with the group, with the environment, and just able to hold that space. Then we go to a quick check-in so that we know how everybody's feeling, allowing everybody to land even more. And then we go to the discussion of whatever the agenda at that point is. The agenda gets formulated ahead of time. But so first we will follow up and see what did we decide last time? What were some actions we need to follow up on? And then as soon as that's all cleared out, we'll go into the deep dive into the content of that day. When we are done, there's a closing process, which essentially is setting the next date, seeing when is the next date going to be, when is the next meeting going to be, and then checking out how was the meeting for you. One particular thing which is also linked to consent decision-making is that when we have discussions, we often do them using a technique of rounds. So rather than allowing people to just kind of jump into the discussion or just going with who wants to contribute, we will often work with rounds where everybody in turn gets a chance to speak. And we find that working with rounds promotes better listening. When you know that your turn to speak will come, you're less anxious to interrupt somebody or to take the word. So we find that working with rounds creates more of an egalitarian speaking space. Everybody knows they can speak, everybody gets space to speak, and it actually promotes deep listening. So that is a technique that we often use. So that's the practice and the pattern of meetings. Is that okay for everybody? I think you've all been in meetings where we use that quite frequently. We're also quite, and Julian's a master in that, in making sure that the documentation is shared so everybody has access to the documentation. So that is really handled well. Within those meetings, very often we will have to identify problems and come up with proposals and take decisions. So a second pattern that we use in sociocracy is what we call consent decision-making. Basically, it's a collaborative process where people take decisions together. And as I said before, decisions are taken, proposals are taken as long as there are no unrational, ungrounded objections. Yeah. So the difference between consensus and consent, basically consensus means that everybody has to agree to your proposal before we can move forward. So let's say Graciela comes up with a proposal A, and she wants the group to agree with proposal A. If we go for a decision-making process which is consensus-based, it means that everybody has to agree that Graciela's proposal A is the best possible one, and it's the one that I actually prefer, right? That takes time. Yeah, it's really rare to be able to take a decision on a proposal that is brought by somebody where everybody says, oh, yes, yes, that's the option I prefer too. I fully agree with everything you're saying. Let's go. Yeah, it takes time and it's not that easy. Consent decision-making basically means that if Graciela comes with the proposition A, we don't expect everybody to fully agree with it. It doesn't have to be the preferred option of everybody in the group. But people need to be able to say, can I work with it, yes or no? If Graciela comes up with an option A, I may think, I don't really like that option. I would have done it differently. I have another option that I prefer, but I don't really have a sound reason for rejecting Graciela's proposal. I may not like it, it's not how I would do it, but I don't really have a fundamental objection. Basically, it's not my preferred option, but I can work with it. Yeah. As long as in the group, everybody can work with it, Graciela's proposal will be validated. So consent is basically looking at what are the options that are proposed, what are the decisions that are proposed in a group that you can tolerate, that are within your range of tolerance. And if a proposal is within your range of tolerance, it will be validated. If, however, Graciela comes up with a proposal where you're like, well, wait a minute, if we go with that proposal, it has a serious impact on how I work. I don't believe in it. I don't think it's going to solve the problem. I don't think it's very efficient. I see better ways to doing it, and it's really founded on rational considerations. Then we'll have a really good discussion. And unless Graciela can adjust her proposal so that my objections are eliminated, if she's not able to do that, then the decision will not move forward. Is that clear for everybody? I know this is sometimes a difficult one to explain. Yeah. Why do we do it this way? Yeah, Julian? You're muted. Oh, that was that. Okay, cool. Why do we do consent decision making? Well, it's faster. Yeah, creating consensus takes a lot of time and is sometimes really difficult. So consent decision making is faster. It's very inclusive. It's based on participative membership in the group. Again, the group makes the decision and not the leader. So the group decides together. And it's still a process that's very participative, that's based on dialogue, on exchange it. And if there is a fundamental objection, the person that has the objections will be heard, and we will find a solution to eliminate the objection. So it's still quite effective. It's a method that is very often used for decisions that are rather short term. It's based on the idea that we're looking for a solution that may not be the best possible solution. We're looking for solutions that are what we call good enough for now and safe to try. It may not be perfect, but I don't see a major risk, and it's good enough for us to test it. And then the whole idea is let's test it. Once we've tested it, let's review it. If we need to do some changes, we will adjust. So it's basically based on an idea of rapid prototyping, fail fast, learn fast, and let's get it right. So it allows a dynamic of continuous improvement. When would we not use consent decision making? If we're really looking at very fundamental longer term decisions that we can't test. So if we were to make a vision for Generative Citizen, for example, for the next 2 years, difficult to test that one. That's like a really fundamental discussion we need to have. That's where we'd go for consensus and not consent. So consent means you need to be able to test it, and you need to be able to have a deadline that stops the testing so that you can evaluate the impact and the effectiveness of your decision. Yeah, is that clear for everybody? You good? Okay. So the what and the why is clear. How do we do it? Well, essentially it would mean, let's continue with Graciela. Graciela comes with a proposal. Maybe she wants to make a proposal for a very specific training program. Graciela would come with a proposal for a specific training program. She would have to clarify first, what is the objective? What's the problem that I'm trying to solve? And then with the group, we will work in 3 different times. Yeah. First, Graciela will present her proposal. She'll say, this is what I want to do. This is the idea I have, and this is how it would work. The first thing we will then do is make sure that everybody is on the same page in terms of understanding the proposal. It doesn't make sense to discuss something if you're not absolutely sure that we've all understood what Graciela wants to do. So as soon as Graciela brings her proposal, we'll have a first round of what we call clarifying questions. Not a discussion, not a I agree, I don't agree, I see, just clarifying questions. Once everybody is on the same page, then we'll do a second round of what we call quick reactions. Quick reactions would be simply asking every member in this group, Graciela just made a proposal for a new training program. How do you feel about it? At that point, we're not looking at very factual, reasoned discussions yet. Maybe Maggie would say, I love it. I just think it's a brilliant idea, and I love the energy she put into it. And Dermot might say, I like the idea. I have a few concerns that I'd like to discuss later. And Mark would say, I really don't like the idea. I think we've got enough training programs. Let's discuss, a little bit what some options might be. But by doing that, I get a very quick feel of what is the temperature in the room. Yeah, so I get a quick sense of which way is this going. On top of it, because this is rather quick, and we're not yet going into in-depth discussions. Say, Mark says, I don't really like it, but he will have already heard, wait a minute, I may not like it, but there are other people in the group that do like it. Right? So it makes you aware immediately that your perspective might not be the only one. Yeah. So you get those different reactions. Once we've had the temperature, measured the temperature in the group, that's when we go then in a third round, a third moment for a more in-depth discussion on what are now the fundamental objections. And this is where Graciela at some point would then ask, or the facilitator, okay, guys, what are we seeing here? Who would be ready to go with this proposition just the way it is? And basically said, I don't have any objection. Who sees some objections and who might have some concerns? And we'll do a round where everybody is just heard in terms of what are the objections that you see. Objection in this case is very specific. It's not just an opinion. It's not just, I don't like it. Yeah? An objection needs to be, and you have those bullet points here, but they need to be fact-based and very rationally, but they have to have some rational foundation. So basically you need to see, well, I don't see how this proposal could be executed because it would get in the way of my activities. I already see some important improvement points. You could see some conflict with values, for example, of generative citizenship. You could basically say it's not effective enough, it's not efficient. Those are all reasons why you might say, I have an objection. Yeah. We first get all the objections and we don't allow a discussion on yes, but. So that there is a space where all we do is listen to all the objections, and ideally they're captured somewhere visually, because the objections are then no longer the property of one person, they become the property of the whole group. Once all the objections have been assembled, then we turn it around and say, okay, now let's have a look at it. Does anybody see any solutions? And then we're going to see for Graciela's proposal, how do we need to adjust Graciela's proposal so that we can eliminate these objections? And that's where we go for integrating objections. We go basically for a collective problem-solving round. Yeah, is everybody okay with that? You good? Okay. We use the same process. So that was consent decision-making. So just stopping 1 second to see consent decision-making is clear for everybody, right? Because it's like, it's a major element of sociocracy. It's kind of important. Because then we use the same method, and that's the third practice, to elect roles, right? So the role of a leader, of a delegate, of a facilitator, of a coordinator. Yes, Graciela?
Yes, I have a question. You mentioned two things that are different, objections and concerns.
Yes.
How would you describe concerns?
Concerned are things that you're worried about, yeah, but you can't really phrase them in the same way that you would phrase an objection, right? So it's less factually underscored, it's less rationally underscored, and it's not going to be as fundamental as the things that are mentioned here. So maybe your proposal, I don't see any fundamental objection to it, right? But maybe I'm worried that people are going to feel like there's a bit too much training. I can't really give you any facts for that. It's a worry that I have. Yeah. Concerns don't stop the validation, but we look at how can we make sure that we watch out for it. Yeah. So whereas objections can stop the validation, concerns are something we take into account, and we look at it and say, well, Graciela, if we move on with this proposal, maybe we could do a quick, sort of like a survey to check how people feel about the number of trainings that are being proposed. Yeah. So objections are basically limited to the things that you see here. Concerns may be concerns about some risks that you have, some feelings that you have, but where you can't really corroborate it factually or in a very rational way. And it's less kind of core than what you see here. It's not that we're pushing to the side. You still need to take them into account. So maybe I'll say, well, if you're really concerned about this, how about we reduce the testing periods? Yeah, somebody might say, I'm really concerned about the risk of a certain proposal on something. I'll say, okay, fine. We had envisioned a testing period of 6 months. Let's test it for 2 months. And then quickly check if that concern is true. And that's how you'll follow up on that. Does that make sense, Graciela? Is that clear?
Yes, very much. Thank
Okay,
you very
great.
much.
Very welcome. So for the election of roles, we use the same process, right? So again, when we ask for a leader, it's not just raise your hand. we use the same process. We basically say we need a leader for a certain circle. The first thing we'll do is describe what does a leader need to do, right? And how long is the term going to be? Then we identify some qualities that we want to see in the leader. So we have a clear framework. And once we have a framework, what's the role of the leader and what are the qualifications we're looking at? Then basically we're going to make it possible for people to note down nominations. Yeah, so they have to define the role and the term. We have to gather qualifications. People first have to agree to the qualifications. So that's another consent tour. Once we're all agreed on the framework, then people will write down nominations. We'll then speak up and say, I nominate this person for that reason. People listen to each other. You can change your view once you've heard everybody else. You can even nominate yourself, which is really cool. And then at the end of the different rounds, we will propose a candidate, or a proposal will come forward, and then we'll use the consent round to again validate these different roles. And this is also how we used the process to identify the different roles at the beginning. Yeah, is that okay for everybody? You're good? Yeah, okay. And at the end, there is some time for questions. So we talked about generative citizenship. We talked about the basic structure with the linked circles that we set up. We talked about what is a circle with the aim, the domain, how we work within those circles. We talked about the different roles within the circles and how these circles are linked. And then we talked about 3 different patterns that we all use in the circles, which is basically the meeting pattern, consent decision-making, and the pattern for selecting people for different roles, right? And that's essentially what we do in terms of sociocracy. It'd be interesting at some point to compare. I know 𝘼𝙣𝙣 is using the same principles. I'm not very clear on how they use it. It'd be interesting to look at that at some point. But that leaves us a little bit of time for questions. So I'm going to maybe stop sharing for a minute and see if there's any questions. Maybe first, everybody okay? You're still alive? Nobody's asleep? You're good? Okay, cool. Anything that needs clarifying? Any clarifying questions? Graciela, yes.
I would like to clarify or expand the concepts of each role, if it's possible, please.
Sure. And what is it you'd like to know more about? When you say more specific, what is it you'd like to
what the facilitator does, what a leader does in terms of actions, in terms of his or her responsibilities.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll start with the easiest. Yeah, Gordon, go ahead. Did you want to add something to
I just wondered whether you were taking multiple questions before you started answering one, which could take a fair bit of time. It's a great question. I'd like to know more about that too. But just for me, on the, it sounds, really good and processing. What I'm interested in to know at this stage is, are there examples of things that the circles or the whole of the generative citizen group, tackle? So what is it specifically? Are there examples? So I know that you've only been going for 2 years, but is there an example of topics that or projects or areas where you look for, making, solutions to certain problems in the world, or and how you make decisions, but just examples of, rather than just the minutiae of how we all operate,
how we work,
behaviors. Yeah, what is it that we're trying to change in the world, or do whatever? So is it stuff like, I don't know, fix global warming, or the conflict in the Middle East, or so I'm just looking at.
Can we take Graciela's question first and then come to your question, Gordon?
Certainly.
I was going to say, because
Absolutely.
I think Graciela's question is more a question on method, and I think for your question, maybe I'll just pass on to Julian, because he probably has more of an overview.
That's great. Perfect.
Is that okay? Yeah. So Graciela, maybe the easiest role, because it's the most clear in terms of, specifically as a facilitator role for me. Well, actually, probably because I was a facilitator quite often. But facilitator, basically, you run the meeting, right? And not running in terms of you're the boss, right? But you decide which stage of the meeting are we in? You decide who speaks, you decide how you want to do the check-in, those kinds of things. So the facilitator, essentially the only task the facilitator has is to run the meeting based on the pattern, so based on the structure that we've all set up, making sure that everybody feels included, everybody participates, and it's essentially a meeting that's run in a coach state and in a psychologically safe way. That's how I would describe the facilitator role, yeah? The coordinator role kind of tackles everything outside of the meeting. So the planning up front, yeah? The handling the documentation during the meeting, so the taking notes, yeah, and everything that comes after, making sure the documents are stored on the right space, making sure that there is an agenda, making sure that we follow up on the agenda, making sure that there's a good communication of the agenda. That's basically, so the practical organization of the meeting is the role of the coordinator. Is that clear, Graciela? Yeah. The delegate has a very easy role. He or she just sits there, just to put it bluntly. He or she is just a participant of the circle. But if we had a normal sociocratic general circle, then the delegate would go and participate in the general circle to kind of convey, this is what we're doing in the circle. So the delegate is kind of the rep. He or she is a representative of the work that's being done at the level of the circle, and he or she goes to the general circle to make sure that the general circle is aware of what's going on in the circle. Yeah.
And one of the things, key quality for the delegate is that they haven't got their own particular agenda when they go to the general circle. Everybody trusts, they get elected because everybody trusts them to represent the diversity of views within the circle. Whereas the leader might be pushing more of an agenda. The delegate is really there to represent the views of the whole circle and is trusted by the circle to do so.
And the leader just kind of dictates the rhythm, in the sense of not practically, but making sure that the circle keeps meeting, making sure that there's activity there, making sure that people keep engaged, that people are working on the activities that are within the domain of the circle, making sure that we're working on the right things, making sure that people are working on it. So it's not a hierarchical managerial role, but more like an inspiring role, watching the framework of what's our aim, what's our mission, what's our mandate, and just making sure that we advance. Yeah, does that make sense? I don't know any other way to phrase it. It's not an easy role because, yeah, you're not, I hear you say you're pushing your own agenda. That's one you're still supposed to be, leading a participative circle. Yeah, you're not the boss, but you're still supposed to kind of drive it. Yeah, so it's not an easy role in that regard. Yeah, does that make sense? It's like, how do you do that without becoming the boss, basically? So it's watching the framework, watching the rhythm, setting the pace, inspiring, motivating, but constantly doing it in a participative way. Yeah, is that clear, Graciela? You're good? Okay.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes.
And so what are we doing in the world, Julian?
Well, it's a good question, actually. When it started, we had this idea there'd be a training circle that would support not only the 5 practices training and perhaps support people becoming trainers in the 5 practices and possibly doing that out in the world. And then we had a project circle, which was, let's run some projects that will make a difference in the world. We found, as 𝘼𝙣𝙣-𝙎𝙤𝙦 said, and I wasn't a part of the project circle, it was too early on in our process. And also within the training circle itself, the main thing was supporting Judith with the 5 practices training. But actually, there were people there who are quite experienced trainers, but they didn't need support including it in their existing work. And there wasn't enough momentum. People were too busy to go off and teach the 5 practices in different places in the world. So the current thinking around the training circle, which is in my draft strategy document, which is only a draft, it hasn't been discussed yet, is, it has been discussed to some degree, this part for the training circle, is that we would turn the 5 practices training into a virtual digital program that, that people could just, look at it as an online program and go through the modules of the 5 practices. So I know that Judith is interested and various other people are interested in the training circle. And so that's something that I think may get supported this year. as a part of our strategy. So that's a sort of practical thing. Let's have an online platform. The other thing that's happened was that initially I was organizing, saying, oh, what would be a good talk on generative citizen? I got Steve and Robert to do it. I got Connie Ray Andreas to do a talk. I did a talk. 𝘼𝙣𝙣 Vega has done a talk. And so that's been really the main output at the moment from Generative Citizen is at the moment 2 monthly talks on topics associated with Generative Citizen. But the event circle is actually quite a new circle. And that's one of the things that you know, I feel we could really strengthen this year. I think there's a lot of potential for more, you know, actually for lots of different talks. I mean, I could imagine at the moment the event circle only wants to have an event a month, but I could see us doing, you know, 11 events a year, excluding August, for example. You know, and we'll see what happens with that. So that's a key part of what we do, is doing events about how to be a generative citizen or a generative human out there in the world. And so it's a sort of, you know, it's one-off training activity. Then the communication circle again is a new circle. And again, for example, I'm talking with Teresa and Jenny early next week, but we're really looking at what we want to do. And the major initiative this year is going to be to engage more people from the generative change and the creative mind community in things like, you know, we want a dedicated social media person. You know, there are a number of activities that we want to focus more on. How do we communicate, you know, within the people who've done level 1, but how do we get more people in from creative mind and generative change? And I think probably both of the circles could do with a couple of more people this year who've got skill, are coming to meetings on a regular basis. So that's sort of where we are. I mean, for the future, you know, if we create this foundation this year in 2025, then, you know, then the skies are oyster in 2026. One of the things that have been talking to Jenny about, not Teresa yet, is the idea that we do something that at 𝘒𝙤𝙤 where Gordon used to work, they used to call it grazing, where we go and talk to influencers and, you know, experienced trainers and facilitators and people within the creative mind and generative change community and say, what would you like? You know, what do you think the world needs? And what contribution do you want to make? And is there a way we can facilitate that within our sociocratic structure? So, you know, really spend time this year asking people, what difference do you want to make? How can we, and what difference do you want to be seen made in the world, and what are you willing to do about it, and how can we support you on that? So we're really at a very, very beginning stage, and I think, but we've had some successes. We've trained people in the 5 practices. We've had quite a lot of really great events. We've got a newsletter. We've got a website. You know, until 2024, it was just a page on, you know, the Life Talent website. It's now got its own website. So we're moving forward slowly. My feeling is, let's see if we can't get a few more people, a bit more energy, and speed it up this year a little bit. Graciela, do you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, thank you. I was listening to you and I was wondering about people who are perhaps not yet part of the, what we could call the generative community. People who didn't take a formal training on generative coaching or whatever, but do have concerns, and maybe their hearts and their soul may be invested in our concerns. And I was wondering about that, because how can, this is something I would like to happen, that they come to our community, that they are part of this community. And that's why I'm bringing this question.
I mean, I'm only one voice in the different circles, you know, so I've got a view, but my view is we just need to strengthen ourselves a little bit, strengthen the circles a little bit. But as soon as we can, as soon as we're a bit stronger, we start to talk about how do we get more people how do we talk to communities outside the generative change and, you know, creative mind community? That's what we want to be doing. But it's like, how do we have enough strength within our circles to do the work that involves engaging more people? So, you know, I'm absolutely with you, Graciela, and that's where I hope we will get to, maybe in the first 6 months of the year, you know. But it's hard finding the right balance between having a little bit of let's get out and do it, and people not feeling too much pressure because everyone's a volunteer. So we sort of need enough inspiration or vision for people to say, I am willing to carve out some time out of my busy life and more time on Zoom to make something happen. But I don't feel so much pressure that it's uncomfortable or I feel resentful, or, you know, it's like getting that sort of balance right.
I thank you very much.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And I would add, personally, you are not the only one voice. You have mine, and I guess more. Just that. Because there is also, from my perspective, a balance between action and the time I decide to commit as a volunteer, and how close that is to my sole purpose, for lack of a better name.
The ideal would be that everybody in Generative Citizen is finding a way that their sole purpose is being expressed through their activities in Generative Citizen. The ideal would be whatever it is your life calling is, what your passion is, what your concern for social justice is, can be fulfilled through the role that you play in Generative Citizen. That would be the role, the ideal. I'm going to shut up for now because there are probably other people with other questions. Back to Anne-Sophie.
Who's going to unmute? Any other questions? Just checking. Also know we're a little bit close to ending time. So Dermot, I see that you're fine. Iris, any questions from you? You seem to be okay. Okay, Mark, you good? Okay, Maggie, you're okay? Okay. Gordon, you had your shot, man. That was a brilliant question. So there you go. You had your answer. Daniel, any questions from you? Oh, Julian has a question.
I'll go when you've checked with everyone.
Okay, Daniel, any questions from you? I'm not going to ask you any more questions, so don't worry about it. But Dermot, no, Dermot said no, so he's fine. Okay, Julian, go next. What's your question?
It was just that I have sent out a draft document, a PowerPoint set for the General Circle meeting in February, which I think every one of you, perhaps except for Aris, might have seen. I don't know whether you've seen it or not. Perhaps Gordon hasn't seen it. With a sort of ideas about what we do in 2025. And, you know, let me know if you haven't got a copy of it or want a refresh copy of it. What I'm trying to do is to get some input and thoughts about what we do in 2025, you know, together before we have that meeting. So, you know, that, you know, let's develop together what it is we want to do this year. And some of that will simply be making ourselves strong enough for doing big stuff in 2026 or in the second half of 2025. But, you know, what do you want? What are your ideas? What do you want to make happen? I'm up for it. Quite a few people are up for it. I know that Graciela's up for it. Teresa's up for it. Jenny's up for it. Sally, you know, Sally Ann's up for it. Judith is up for it. There's quite a lot of people willing to put energy in. So, yeah. So if you haven't had those slides, let me know.
Cool. So would it be okay, because I see there's no more questions, if we do, you know, conform with our principles, so a quick checkout and just kind of like, what are you leaving with? It could be 2-3 words, maybe not a speech of 5 minutes because we haven't got time for that. But it's kind of like, what are you leaving with? It could be an emotion, it could be an insight. And then once everybody's had their word to say, we will close the meeting. Is that okay?
Shall I stop the recording at this point?
Yes, that would be best. Thank you. So maybe Maggie, you're sitting